Today, we will discuss the lumdus of Pidyon HaBen. Next week, a question halacha lamaisa that Poskim dealt with for the past 700 years. What is the halacha when tragically, by the 31st day after a bchor is born, there is no father? The father either passed away during his wife's pregnancy or after the child was born. So the halacha lamaisa we will leave for next week. Today we will discuss the lumdus. So I hope you got the sheet that I have before me. Source number 1, the Gemara at the end of Psochem, the last shtickle Gemara in Psochem. Rav Shamloi ikla le Pidyon HaBen. Rav Shamloi came to a Pidyon HaBen. Boyemenei. They asked him, Pshita al Pidyon HaBen asher kedeshono b'mesoisa v'tzivono avi HaBen mevorech. After all, it says mitzvah, and he is the one that performs the mitzvah. Goes without saying, he is the one to say the bracha. Shechiyono v'kimono v'yigon azman hazeh. Who says the shechiyono? Kohen mevorech or avi HaBen mevorech? What's the shaila? Kohen mevorech the kamot hanoah liyoda. He gets the money. Or avi HaBen mevorech the kohavid mitzvah. By Ava biyodai. Reb Shamloi didn't know. Ose shul bei midrashim. He went into the yeshiva and he asked, Amru le avi HaBen mevorech shtayim. V'helchasa avi HaBen mevorech shtayim. And what we need to understand, what was the hava minute that the kohen says the shechiyanu? Well, he gets the money. But does anybody that receives a gift say a shechiyanu? Definitely not. You got a present from a neighbor. You got 5 slom. It's not $1 million. It's not $100 million. You got 5 slom. Why would you say a shechiyanu? So to me, it goes without saying the have a minute that the kohen should say the bracha is, after all, he's involved in the mitzvah. He's part of it. After all, it's not only receiving a gift, but he's a participant, an active participant. And that brings us to the fundamental question of today's shiur. What is the role of the kohen in mitzvahs Pidyon HaBen? Is it passive or active? Is he just a recipient of matnes kahuna? Or is there some kind of a deal, some kind of a transaction? After all, the Torah calls it Pidyon. Source number 2 is that one line from the Minchas Osha. Hina yesh lachkor, b'kol ikol mitzvah zu. Ha'im yesh geder Pidyon mamash, o shema ein ba ela mitzvahs nesinas matnes kona l'kohen. V'navi mekorot l'shnei adrachim eile. And that is the essence of today's shiur. Source number 3 requires a brief introduction. Zois Torah's Hamincha. My precious son-in-law, Beinish Rosenbaum, even if you don't know him personally, but you all got to know him because he is my right-hand man in Harbotz's Torah. Beinish is a real Talmud Chacham, and he's the biggest Bukya Minchas Osha in the world today. And he remembers the Minchas Osha much better than I do. And when I look for a source in my Svarim in Minchas Osha, Beinish is the one. I asked him. So Baruch Hashem, huge simcha for me this week. The Minchas Osha Shara Shtuvas Chelik Daled came out. We've been waiting for the Sefer a long, long time. And once again, the set Minchas Osha Shara Shtuvas is available, 4 volumes. 4 volumes that have slightly over 500 Jews. And I humbly say, I wrote almost 40 Sforim. But the Minchas Osha Shara Shtuvas is the one that really scares me. Giving Psak Halacha Lamaisa and Dalet Chelke Shechanach is really a huge responsibility, and I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu every day So Bainish put together a kuntras, so he started a mincha, because my swarm are called mincha sosha. Hashkofa, snippets from the chuvas, from other swarm. Hashkofa salimud, darke hatalmud. So Ois Yud Ches in that kuntras, so he started a mincha. I write, there are 5 different types of Pidyon we find in halacha. Let me briefly describe from 1 to 5, from top to bottom. Pidyon Hegdish. Pidyon Hegdish is acquisition. It's just like any other Kinyan. Because Hegdish is a huge financial enterprise. In days of yore, there's Kedushas Aguf. Kedushas Aguf is Zvachim Vemenachos, Korbanos. And then there's Kedushas Bedek Habayis. People donated not only money, but also stuff to Hegdish. Hegdish needs paint. Hegdish needs wood. Hegdish needs gold for maintenance. Maintenance of this huge structure. Not only maintenance, but ongoing activities. If Hegdish has animals for karbonis, those animals need to be fed. Somebody feeds them. With what do we feed them? So Hegdish is a huge financial enterprise. People donated furniture to Hegdish. Well, Hegdish doesn't need tables and chairs in the Beis Hamikdash, ki ein yeshiva ba'azora. So Hegdish doesn't need sofas. But when people donate stuff, the Gizber decides, do I want this stuff? I could sell it and make money. So Hegdish buys and Hegdish sells. Pidyon Hegdish is not relevant to Kedushas Aguf. There is no chilul on Kedushas Aguf. But Kedushas Bedek Habayis is acquisition. You give Hegdish money and you buy stuff from Hegdish. Rashi above Mesiah Daf Memvav says, Kinyan Kesef Bamitaltelen, we learn from Pidyon Hegdish. Benosan HaKesef V'kamroi. So Hegdish is acquisition. Maser Sheni, number 2, we paskin Maser Sheni Momen Baalim. It's not Momen Gavaya. So it's not about acquisition. Let me first explain what is Maser Sheni, because maybe some of you don't know what is Maser Sheni. Maser Sheni is 10% of fruits, whatever fruit you have. 10% is Maser Sheni. Maser Sheni doesn't go neither to a Kohen nor to a Levi. Maser Sheni you need to bring to Yerushalayim, and you're only entitled to eat Kedushas Maser Sheni Yerushalayim. But people were mafresh Maser Sheni all year round. And in days of yore, there was no freezers and no refrigeration. So those fruits will rot away in a week's time. So your mafresh Maser Sheni, and then your poida, Pidyon Maser Sheni, means transferring the kedusha of Maser Sheni from the fruit to money. And then you take that money to Yerushalayim 3 times a year when you're oiler regel, and you buy food in Yerushalayim, and the kedusha is transferred back from the money to the payers. So Maser Sheni is not an acquisition, because the payers were yours before the Pidyon, and they're yours after the Pidyon. So the payers are not transferred from one owner to another, because we paskin Maser Sheni is Momen Baalim. So the concept of Pidyon Maser Sheni is transferring Kedusha. Zeh tachas zeh. The Kedushas Maser Sheni goes from the payers to the money, and you travel to Yerushalayim with the money, and it's transferred back from the money to payers. Payers Shvius. Shvius is unique. Kedushas Shvius. Payers that have Kedushas Shvius. You could be poida. But the original Peiros Shvius will always have Kedushas Shvius, and it's impossible to take Kedusha off of them. Kedushas Shvius is, I'm groping for the right word. It's not transferred, but rather broadened. The money is nitpas, tfisas kedusha. And from the money to wine, from wine to oil, from oil to apples, from apples to meat, from meat to fish. But the original payers of Kiddush Shvius will always stay Kiddush Shvius. From stage number 2, it is transferred from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, and Ad Netzach. That's Pidyon Peiros Shvius. Petach Chamor, Osa Banoah. And the mitzvah is, you poida a chamor b'seh. Chamor is Osa Banoah. When you poida in a seh, the chamor is mutar banoah, and the seh is mutar banoah as well. So Pidyon Chamor is acquisition. The chamor belongs to Shevet Kohana. Your poida, the seh goes to the kohen, but it's mutar banoah, unlike the chamor. And finally, Pidyon HaBen. How do we define Pidyon HaBen? It is not similar to any of the first 4. Definitely isn't acquisition. Because the child never belonged to the kohen, and the child will never belong to his father. A child doesn't belong to anyone. A child is not the monetary possession of its parents. A child belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and belongs to himself. So Pidyon HaBen is definitely not an acquisition, because the child didn't belong to the kohen before you bought him out, and it doesn't belong to the father after you buy him out. It is also not transferring kedusha, because there is no halachic kedusha on a child. How do we define Pidyon HaBen? I suggest hopping over to source number 8, page number 3, the Seforno. Source number 8, I think, is the 3rd page of our source sheets. Number 8. Could we scroll down? Very short Seforno. באופן שהיו בחירי אודם ביסוד כמוני זהירים או יותר, מיוחדם לעבוד סוקר, ואסורים בעבוד סדיית. Well, the Seforno says, if you didn't do Pidyon HaBen, the child is asur b'hanoah, asur b'avodah sadiat. Well, 30-day-old child can't wash the dishes, can't do the laundry, can't sweep the floor, but it's still a chiddush to say that it's asur b'hanoah. And what about a yosin? That's going to be out next week's shiur. But many poskim say, you can't do Pidyon HaBen if there is no father. You need to wait till he becomes bar mitzvah. So for 13 years, asur b'hanoah, the Seforno was one of the most beautiful commentators on Chumash. But we're not aware that he was a posik. And this psak is unheard of. Totally unacceptable. No posik, no other source says that a b'chor is asur b'avodah sadiat. So obviously, Pidyon HaBen is unlike Pidyon Hagdish. There is no acquisition. And the child doesn't change hands. And Pidyon HaBen is also unlike Pidyon Maaseh Sheni, because there is no intrinsic kedusha that is transferred from the child to the money. The child is not Hagdish before the Pidyon, and the money is not Hagdish after the Pidyon. So how do we define Pidyon HaBen? Back to page number 1, source number 4, and that's a sif in the Shulchan Aruch, bottom of the page. The Ramo Paskins based on Chuvas Rivash. Einu av yochel livdois al yedei shliach, v'gam ein beis din poiden oisoi beloi av. The second part of the sif is next week's discussion. Could Beis Din do Pidyon HaBen without a father? The Ramo clearly says no. But let's go back to the Reisha, the first part of the Sif. Eino av yochel livdois al yedei shaliach. This is a huge chiddush. There is no shlichus by Pidyon HaBen. And the father must do this alone on his own. The Taz and the Shach contemplate why would shlichus not apply, but the Gaon throws a bomb. Source number 5, Bin Agudah. Kol ze tamua. V'lo mebaya lidei shliach d'shlucha shel adam kamoisa. Why wouldn't shlichus apply? The Gaon wonders, why wouldn't shlichus apply? Shlicha shel adam kamoisa is by mitzvahs, is by kenyonim, but the Gaon goes far beyond that. Elo da'af acher yochel livdois afelu below da'atoi shel av. Just like Pidyon Maser Sheni. Anybody could be poida Maser Sheni or Hagdish. V'kol sheken kan she'enoi elo choiv ba'alma. She'harei hakoyin goyve mishubadim. V'chi haporeach choiva shel achar enoi niftar haloiva. Elo delechatchila yosef mitzvah ba'av. So the Gaon says anybody can do Pidyon HaBen on any child, even without the father's consent. Why? It's just like paying a loan. Reuven owes money to Shimon. Levi is Reuven's friend, and he knows Shimon as well. Levi knows that Reuven is in dire straits. He's struggling financially. Levi also knows that Shimon is a tough person and he demands his money. So Levi turns to Shimon. Reuven owes you $10,000. I want to pay that loan. And I did this many times in my shchuna when I become aware that a family owes a lot of money in a makolet. And the makoletnik says, I need my money. I can't give Ashrai, I can't give, what is Ashrai in English? Sometimes words evade.
Credit,
yeah. I can't give him more than credit. He owes thousands of shkolim. So sometimes we collect money and we pay the makola directly and says, he's struggling, you got your money. So the Gaon says, Pidyon HaBen is like Priyas Chayv. Anybody could be poida his friend's child. You don't even need the father's consent. This is a very problematic halacha. So let me describe an imaginary scenario, but it could be a very troubling scenario. This couple struggled to have children, and they went through a lot. After 10 years of marriage, they finally had a baby boy, and the simcha is overwhelming. And the father of this precious, precious kinder rents a very expensive hall, takes the greatest caterer in town, invites 150 people to the Pidyon HaBen, and then his bad neighbor, nasty guy. In the morning of the Pidyon HaBen, he's the first one to arrive, and he calls the father aside, and he says, you can have a beautiful party, but don't call it Pidyon HaBen because I did it for you yesterday. I was pointing your son. And the guy blows us up and he says, whoa, what are you, crazy? Who's the Kohen? And his neighbor says, I don't want to tell you who the Kohen is. It has nothing to do with you. I was pointing your son, and if you're going to make a bracha, that's going to be a bracha levatama. You could send your Kohen home and just have a beautiful party. Okay, it's a great party. You want it to be a Sudas Mitzvah, maybe do a Siyam Masechta. Because I did Pidyon HaBen for you a day before yesterday with the Kohen. Okay. So we get into the Shaila, could you do Pidyon HaBen before day 31? Okay, so let's change the story. I did Pidyon HaBen for your son a half hour ago, today in the morning. According to the Gaon, That could be a real scenario. But the Rama says, Ein Beisen Pidyon B'li Av. And the Rama says, even Shlichus doesn't apply. So actually, this is the machlokes. Is Pidyon HaBen an actual Pidyon, or it is just a transfer of money? The Gaon says it's just transferring money and nothing more. Paying a loan, paying a debt. You had a baby boy, firstborn, you owe money to Shevet Kahuna. Anybody could pay that debt for you. The Rama says, no. There's an actual Pidyon. We can't ignore the lashon of the pasuk. B'richoyer b'necho tivdeh. What happens with this Pidyon? Nothing happens. It's not a transfer of kedusha, and it's not a purchase. It's not an acquisition, but it's still a Pidyon. Machne Ephraim, to my dismay, on our sheet, the Machne Ephraim just talks about shlichus, and he says shlichus will apply, but there's an additional paragraph which, for some reason, is not on our sheet, in which the Machne Ephraim says the same as the God. Anybody could do Pidyon HaBen for another, even without the father's knowledge and without the father's consent. Source number 7. And I need to give a little introduction to the Ktsois HaChosh. The Ktsois deals with the question, could you use a kohen that's a minor for Pidyon HaBen? He's a kohen. It's before his bar mitzvah. Why would one want to do Pidyon HaBen with a child, with a kid? Well, I don't know. But some people believe that there are some families that have yichus kohuna more than others. To me, all the kohanim are the same. Whoever has a cheskes kohuna has a cheskes kohuna. Nobody could go back 500 years and know exactly what happened in any family. But anyway, maybe this kohen is the son of a great Rebbe, and the Rebbe is somewhere in Chutz La'aretz, and for the chassid it means so much, he needs the Rebbe's son. But anyway, could you do Pidyon HaBen with the kohen kohen? The Ktsois HaChosh and the Pri Chodosh both agree that you could, but they have different approaches. Why? And the question they see is a kohen doesn't have a kinyan, so he can't be kind of those chamisha sloim. And if the kohen didn't get those 5 sloim, how would the Pidyon, how would you be yaitze? So the Pri Chodosh says, das acheres makna, a kohen has a kinyan. Toises and Rashi both assume das acheres makna, a kohen has a kinyan. That's the early Ashkenazim. The early Sfaradim disagree. But Toises and Kedushin Yutes and other sources say, das acheres makna, kohen yesh lo kinyan. So the Pri Chodosh says, das acheres makna. We are the ones that give the gift to a kohen kohen. And when it's das acheres makna, he has a kinyan. Comes along the Ktsos and he says, by matnas kohuna, there is no das acheres makna. Because matnas kohuna belonged to Shevet Kahuna. And the father just has Toivus and Nur. So in Minchas Osher ala Torah, I argued, there's a difference between Shar matnas kohuna, Trumas Masa, Besar Kodshim, Reishis Hagens, Zeroya Lechayayim V'Keva. When the matnas kohuna are a certain object, that belongs to Shevet Kahuna. But Pidyon HaBen is different. Pidyon HaBen, you're giving your own personal money. And by Pidyon HaBen, there is no hafrosha, and then at stage number 2, nesina, like Trumas Amaisis. Pidyon HaBen, you take 5 slum out of your pocket and you give a gift. So I think the Pri Chodosh is right. That is das acheres makna. When the Ktsois argues by matnas kohuna, there is no das acheres makna, that makes sense by all other matnas kohuna when it's a certain object. Whether it's yesh vo kedusha, like Trum and Trumas Maisa, maybe even Kedushas Aguf, like Besara Chatos, and Tvom She'em Bem Kedusha, Reishis Egez, Roy L'chaim V'Keva, but Pidyon HaBen is your personal money. That would be Dasar Esmatan. The Ksais has a different approach. And the Ksais quotes the Toises in Sanhedrin of Samaches. Even though a cotton doesn't have Kinyan, but by Schilas Payalim he does. And if you hire a cotton to do work, in Eretz Yisrael, all the selling a dasam and a ravis usually are kids. So the boss has a little budka in the shuk dalad aminim, and there's a boy selling. So you hired a kid to do a job. Babysitter. Yeah. Many times babysitters are young girls. She's not even bas mitzvah. So Tosa says, schar pu'ula, even a cotton, is kaina, because you don't need to do a kinyan when you're getting paid. The work you did, that's the kinyan. So the Ksai says, in Pashas Koirech, the Pasuk says, Sochar hilochem chelef avodaschem. So koinem that eat matnas kohuna, that is compensation because they work for Klal Yisrael and Beis Hamikdash, and that is why a kot nesh lo kinyan. Once again, in Minchas Osha, I made a very powerful argument. If you learn carefully the psukim in Pashas Koirach, it is only matnas leviyah that the Torah says, Sochar hilochem chelef avodaschem. By matnas kohuna, the pasuk says, Hashem hu nachlosa. Matnas kohuna is meshulchin gavoya. That is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not compensation for the work, only matnas leviyah. But the Ksais assumes matnas kohuna are also chelef avodaschem. That's a separate argument that we have in Minchas Osha and Pashas Koirach. Coming back to our sugya, both the Ktsois HaChoshen and the Pri Chodesh deal with one problem. How is a cotton koina those 5 sloim that you give him? But if Pidyon HaBen is anything like an acquisition, the cotton not only receives money, he's an active participant. It is as if he gives the child. And in no way do they offer an explanation. How could a cotton give? They only deal with the question, how could he get? How is he kaina? The Chamish Islam, either Dasaches Makna or Schar Pa'ola, being compensated for the work they do. So obviously, the Goen, the Machna Ephraim, the Ktsois HaChoshen, and the Pri Chodesh all are of the same opinion. The Kohen is totally passive, a passive participant. All he's doing is getting a gift, nothing more than that, going against the Ramah and the Rivash. Because according to the Ramah and the Rivash, there is no shlichus. And one can never do Pidyon HaBen without the father. So obviously, according to the Ramah and the Rivash, we are dealing with Pidyon, which brings us right now to page number 3, directly to the Rambam. I need to get up from my chair one moment, and I'm going to be right back. Chosav Rambam, mitzvahs asay pei, ha-mitzvah hashmoinim, shetzivonu livdois bechorodom, v'sheniten adome mahem lakoyen. And now he explains, Bir lono hanasina hazois eich tihye, v'hu שנבדהו מן הכהן, וכאילו הוא כבר זוכה בו ונקנהו ממנו בחמישה סלויים. Yes. It's as if, but as if has significance. And the Rambam clearly says, the Kohen is an active participant, not passive. It is as if the child belongs to the Kohen, and we need to buy the child from the Kohen. It's as if. It's like a show, but that is the Haggadah. Podoi tivde es b'chara adam. And the same is in Sefer HaChinuch. Livdo es b'chara adam. Kloimar, shemitzvah al-kodesh, sheyivde men ha-koyen b'noi shehu b'chor. Yivde. Rashba. Source number 3. Rashba. So the Rashba, this might be the most famous tshuva in all the Rashba. The Rashba has a lengthy tshuva trying to explain on which mitzvahs do we say a brocha and which mitzvahs don't we say a brocha. So we just have a very small snippet of that tshuva. V'chein matnes kona ein mevorchem anesinosan. The eine is so lonesome mishaloi. Hashem yizborach zikoysen lakoyin mishulchin gavoy kazocho. V'nesikel nesina shekel b'shona ki yotzavoy. Ki mamcho hakol umiyotcho natanu lachom. You don't say a brocha on any transfer of money. Not when you give tzedakah, not when you give a loan, not when you give matnas kona. So why do we say a brocha on Pidyon HaBen? Aval al Pidyon HaBen v'al afroshas chala v'masas mevorach. B'pnei she'eina mevorach al anasina. Ela al afrosha v'al Pidyon. So the Rashba explains, we don't say a brocha on matnas kona. The only matnas kona that we do say a brocha is Pidyon HaBen. Because the brocha is not on the transfer of money. The brocha is on the Pidyon. So obviously, yes, it's Pidyon. Now, different than all the others, going back to page number 1, Zois Toras HaMincha, there is no direct halachic change. Nothing changed. It's not an acquisition. You know, the ceremony, the ritual is, the Kohen asks the father, Ma boyes tvei. I wonder whether it ever happened in history. Person, first marriage, has 10 kids. He remarried, later stage in his life. His wife never had children. And his child number 11 is a b'chor. Comes to Pidyon HaBen, the Kohen asks the father, Ma boyes tvei. The father contemplates for a moment or two, and he says, I'm embarrassed to say, Mr. Kohen, but I don't have parnasa, and I already have 10 kids to take care of. My wife isn't feeling very well, and I need to pay a mortgage. You know what? Take the baby, take care of him. I don't have enough money right now, you know, I have an upcoming mortgage. I'm in huge debt. So have the baby. Is that an option? It's ridiculous. I think the Kohen would respond and say, crazy man, take your baby and give me my money. Why did you invite me? Give me my money. But nevertheless, the Kohen says, Ma boyes tvei. And the Rambam explains, that is the mitzvah. Ke'ilu zocha boy ha-kohen v'nikneu heimenu. And that is why the Rashba says, you never say a brocha on giving money. Pidyon HaBen is not just about giving money, it's about Pidyon. An imaginary Pidyon, but nevertheless, Pidyon. And that is the opinion of the Ramah. You can't make a shliach. On the other hand, we have 4 huge achronim in chronological order, starting off with the Pri Chodosh, Machne Ephraim, Vilna Gaon, Tzos HaChosh. And we prove they assume, no, Pri Aschoiv, Matnes Gaon. do we have any reason to support the Achronim? Because it is a bit asymmetrical. It's a lopsided machlokes. If we have the Rambam, the Rashba, the Rivash against Achronim. This brings us to our last source, Rosh. This Rosh is a bit lengthy, but I will underline the relevant piece. Matzosi tikun hagaoinim. Tikun hagaoinim l'sidure min hoge de Pidyon uberchose delay hochi. So the Gaonim explain the tekes, the routine, the ritual of Pidyon HaBen. So after the father says two brachas, the two brachas bring us back to source number one, the last Gemara in Psochim. Rav Shamloi, the father says his two brachas, Ashikadishanu and Shechiyanu. Then we pour a cup of wine for the Kayin, fourth Shura, line number 4. V'maisa asu mevorach kahana, bori priagofen, bori atze b'samim. And then he says, Borachat Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kiddush ubememeyimoy. ולארבעו יום בכל הכבוד מסיים וארבעו משמונה וארבעו שיש בו ונופח בו נשמה ויבוא בו נפש חיים ויעוד לנפש חיו אור ובוסר הלבישו יבצע מסע וגיל מסר חוי. A lengthy bracha that the Kayan says. And then the father says, Zeh b'ni v'chor, Zeh b'ni v'chor. And then they ask the Kayan, last line, ולא ינהגו לברך הכהן ברוך הזו ובצרפס ובאשכנז. לא מצינו שום מברך שום ברוך שלא יזכרו במשנה בית הספר. ואויד, למה יבורך הכהן? אינו יעשה שום מצווה אלא מקבל מתנס כהונה. The Rosh argues, why would the Kohen say a bracha at all? He's not an active participant. He's just a recipient of matnas kehuna. He really has no part in the mitzvah. He's just like a mailbox. He's just a recipient. So why would he say a bracha? Eina yoseh shum mitzvah. This Rosh would support the Achronim, contrary to the Rashba and the Rambam that I quoted. So we have a very clear picture. Two different approaches to Pidyon HaBen. Is there an actual Pidyon, or is just a transfer of Chamishul Siloim? And we brought various different sources, Lakan, Ulachan. And I think the sugi is extremely fascinating. Next week, we will talk about the relevance of this machlekes regarding the question that spans 700 years. What do we do when a child never has no father, when the 31st day arrives and there's a mitzvah Pidyon HaBen? So let me just share a word of the Panavish Rav. The Panavish Rav was a Kohen. His name was Kanaman. Naturally, Kanaman or Kahana. And he was a very sought-after Kohen, as you could imagine. Who wouldn't want the Panavish Rav to officiate that as Pidyon HaBen? And whenever the Panavish Rav spoke at a Pidyon HaBen, his drasha was this. So the Kohen asked the father, "Ma boy is fine. You want your money or you want the child?" As if there are two options. So the word of the Panavish Rav was, "Dear friend, you're a daddy. You had a child. It's about time you think seriously about life. What are your priorities? Do you care for children or you care for your money?" That's the question, Ma boy is right. Now that you have a child, start thinking seriously about life. Mm-hmm. Because I want you to know, raising children, la'avas Hashem, u'liyiras Hashem, and to Talmud Torah will cost money. So it's about time you start setting your priorities. Ma boy is right. What's more important to you? Is it your children or your money? So that was the Panavish Rav's pshat, Ma boy is right. I don't need to say it's not really pshat, but it's a powerful musar point. So that was the Panajarov's Pidyon HaBen Torah. Okay, so thank you for being with me today, as always.
Quite a Rav. Can I assume that the Rav wrote this up on the Tshuva in one of the Shalos Tshuvas Minchas Asher, the Shilas, so we can prepare the Marmakaimis for next time?
Yeah,
This question?
I did write a Tshuva, but it's not printed yet in the full Chanukah. It might be in Chelik, but we will send it over.
Okay.
Okay.